Hey everybody, GrayStillPlays here. We're going to be doing something a little bit different today. We're going to be talking about some of the games that are near and dear to my heart from my childhood back in the olden days for an old dog like me. We're talking about the top 5 old school MMOs. Now these MMOs are going to be MMOs of my choice. This is my opinion only, so it doesn't have anything to do with how many copies they sold or what some sort of aggregate site thought that their numeric score was. There's a couple of things that are going to be rules for these games. They're all going to be pre-World of Warcraft era, so probably pre-2004. They all have to have official releases, so nothing that was ever just stuck in beta. And they have to be massive multiplayer, meaning that people are playing together, not in like tiny segregated instances. So, with that as it is, let's go ahead and start with
Number 5.
Number 5 is going to be Shadowbane, released in March of 2003 by Ubisoft. This was pretty impressive as a new game that had come out because it had a couple things that no one had ever done before. Some of the things that it had that were unique is it had a seamless world map. There was no instancing at all. It was just one enormous world map that you could pretty much go anywhere on. That was revolutionary at the time. It also had a big emphasis on PvP combat. That was open world PvP, and it was to the point where you could build, siege, and raise towns. The economy and the government itself was completely player owned. Very unusual. So you could actually build up a town, your guild could build it, own everything in it, the merchants and buildings and everything, and it could actually be destroyed and taken from you by other guilds. Kind of cool. It had classes that were race and gender and class specific, and other than that, everything was kind of determined by the players. I thought that was actually kind of neat at the time. Not the best looking game, but definitely a fun game. From there, we're going to go on to
Number 4.
Asheron's Call. This was released back in November of 1999 by Turbine, and this is one of those games where there was no real classes at all specifically. Everything was allocated by choosing just skills like unarmed combat or melee defense, and then you had to assign attribute points into various stats like strength and coordination and there have you. So you could learn basically any skill you wanted. You weren't really like assigned certain skills and you could never do anything else like a class might do. The other thing that was really neat about it was it had an original style of magic system where there was like this formula for each spell, and you had to learn those formulas through trial and error in order to cast the various magics. You could also imbue your equipment with various enchantments and spells, and I thought that was pretty neat as well. They also had kind of a weird like buddy system. It was like a vassal patron system where a lower level character could swear fealty to a higher level character, and then that vassal would provide bonus experience to the patron, and the patron obviously would maybe provide things like money or equipment or just knowledge on how the game worked. Moving from there, we're going to go into
Number 3.
This is EverQuest, released in March of 1999 by Sony Online Entertainment. EverQuest, one of the original 3D games and a masochistic game, if you definitely ask me. I had a ton of fun in this game, but man, everything punished you in this game. There were 14 classes in the original, and the races had different attributes about them, like their vision. I remember this to this day, how being a human was just so annoying because you couldn't see anything at night. Unless you had some sort of light source or special ability, when it got night outside, it was dark and it was a pain in the ass to see anything. Everything in the game could outrun you. If you started to lose a fight, you were basically done. You could turn your back and try and get away, but there was no way to try and inch your way to the zone. There was heavy experience penalties. It wasn't unusual to lose hours and hours of gameplay thanks to deaths. Soloing was almost impossible later in the game. There were zones that had no real congruence on the levels. You'd be fighting a creature of one level, and then all of a sudden a giant creature, who remembers the sand giants, would come and just slay you in one hit, and you had to travel to get your spells, to get spell scrolls to copy into your books. You didn't just get them automatically, and you probably had to die a bunch of times to get there. all the way to where they were traveling through all those zones. From there, we're going to move on to
Number 2.
For number 2, we're talking about Ultima Online. Oh yeah, I still remember this game to this day when it came out. So cool. This was released in September of 1997 by Origin Systems. And this was a game where instead of having a class, you had skills that you had to hone by using them. You gained experience in your skills by doing them over and over again, which meant like a lot of sword swinging or hiding or fishing or casting spells. And speaking of spells, each spell had reagents that you had to have in order to make the spell go off. So you always had to have a full supply on you, and there was also a full loot system. This pissed all kinds of people off, but I thought it was an awesome part of the game. When you died, all of your stuff could get took by the guy who killed you. That meant that when you went down, there was a huge, just sinking feeling in your heart about all those reagents and gold and weapons and everything that you were not going to have anymore. You could also own and decorate houses, castles, and keeps. They would decay over time, but that was really cool to be able to have like a piece of property. And I remember seeing a castle that was about to crumble and waiting and hiding just to see if I could get a plot on it with dozens and dozens of other hidden people, everyone wanting to get that piece of the game for themselves. But from there, we are going to move on to
Number 1.
And the number 1, in my opinion, is always going to be Dark Ages of Camelot. This is from October of 2001 by Mythic Entertainment, and there was so much to this game that I really loved. There were 3 different kingdoms to choose from. First off, you had Albion, which is like your classic English medieval knights on horseback, very kind of realistic in the races. They were all just humanoid races. Then you had Midgard, which was your rustic, fur-wearing, snowy Valhalla barbarians with forts and wood and things like that. They had a couple of different races like dwarves and trolls, and I'm not talking like the fantasy green skin trolls. We're talking about like trolls that were literally carved from the stone of the earth. And then you had Hibernia, which had that really fantasy feel, that light and graceful, fantastical feel from like storybooks. Very Celtic, and it had a lot of races like elves and firbolgs. And it had a million classes in it. I mean, seriously, there were so many classes in this game. 32 classes in the original. Because you had classes for each of the kingdoms. It also had realm versus realm PvP, and it was big on it. Meaning you fought over these relics that gave your kingdom various bonuses, and the fights were insane. There was just tons of people on the map at all the time. It allowed you to gain realm ranks that gave you realm points, or you can spend those realm points on different things like better stealth or faster power and mana regeneration. But the coolest thing about it that I liked was that it had positional combat and combos when it came to being a melee, which was a stark contrast to the classic kind of click auto attack that melee fighters had been stuck with for so long. Anyway, those are my top 5, guys. I hope that you enjoyed them. If you have games that you think belong in those top 5 old school style MMOs, please put them in the comments. I'd love to see them and kind of talk about those, because this is kind of a couple of those things in my life that shaped me as a gamer today, and I like to see what people have to think about it and say about it. And if you have any kind of suggestions on another top 5 that you'd like to see me put my opinions to, feel free to say that as well. Hope you enjoyed it, guys, and I'll talk to you later. Much love. Bye.